the fog-shrouded SEAL compound, officers sat around the briefing table, lamplight casting harsh shadows on a stranger, a Mafia kingpin, summoned as an underground tactical consultant. SEAL Admiral Reynolds leaned back in his chair, a thin smile playing on his lips. "So, mob boss, our military has call signs. What about you?" Laughter rippled through the room. The man remained silent, cold eyes scanning the faces around him. Then he spoke 2 words, barely above a whisper. "Lone Eagle." The laughter died. A young officer dropped his coffee cup. Admiral Reynolds stood abruptly, his face draining of color as if he'd just seen a ghost from the past. The desert wind howled across the SEAL compound in Nevada, carrying sand that stung like tiny bullets against the reinforced windows. Inside the briefing room, fluorescent lights hummed above polished steel tables where classified folders lay stacked and sealed. Commander Jake Harrison stood at attention near the door, arms crossed, watching the unusual guest being escorted through security checkpoints. Vincent Moretti walked with the measured confidence of a man who'd survived more bullets than most soldiers had fired. His tailored charcoal suit seemed absurdly out of place among the tactical gear and combat fatigues that filled the compound. 2 armed guards flanked him, though he moved as if they were merely decorative. "This is insane," Lieutenant Sarah Chen muttered to Harrison. "We're bringing in organized crime to discuss national security?" "Orders from above," Harrison replied flatly. "Apparently, Moretti has connections to an international smuggling network we've been tracking. Arms dealers, human trafficking, the works." Admiral Thomas Reynolds entered last, his weathered face betraying nothing. At 58, he'd led operations in 4 theaters of war, earned 2 Navy crosses, and lost count of the men he'd commanded into darkness. He took his position at the head of the table, gray eyes assessing Moretti with the cold calculation of a predator. "Mr. Moretti," Reynolds began, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in uniform. "I'll be honest, half my team thinks bringing you here is a joke. The other half thinks it's a trap." Moretti settled into the chair at the opposite end of the table, unbuttoning his suit jacket with deliberate slowness. "And what do you think, Admiral?" "I think desperation makes for strange allies." Reynolds opened a folder. "You've been operating in Eastern Europe for the past 7 years. Word is, you've got your fingers in every dirty deal from Warsaw to Istanbul. What we need to know is—" "Your tactical approach is flawed," Moretti interrupted, his tone casual but precise. "You're planning to hit the compound in Odessa from the north. That's a kill box. They've got overlapping fields of fire on every approach vector." The room fell silent. Harrison's jaw tightened. "How the hell would you know our—" "Because I know how soldiers think," Moretti continued, leaning forward. "Textbook tactics, which is why your last 3 operations in that region failed. You're predictable." Reynolds' hand curled into a fist on the table. "You think this is a poker game? We're talking about taking down a network that's killed American citizens." "I know exactly what this is." Moretti's voice dropped. "Harder now. And I'm telling you, if you go in that way, you'll lose men. Good men. The kind who follow orders because they believe in something bigger than themselves." Lieutenant Marcus Webb, seated near the window, noticed something, then a faded tattoo on Moretti's wrist as his sleeve shifted. The edge of a wing rendered in precise military style. Not the gaudy ink of street gangs, but the clean lines of something earned. Reynolds caught the exchange of glances between his officers. He stood, buttoning his jacket. "We'll take a 15-minute break. Moretti, you stay put." As the officers filed out, Reynolds remained, studying the man across from him. In the harsh overhead light, he could see scars, old ones, the kind made by shrapnel and fire, not bar fights. "You're not just a businessman, are you?" Reynolds asked quietly. Moretti's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "We're all someone we'd rather forget, Admiral." The break room hummed with low, tense conversations. Harrison poured his 3rd coffee, his hands steady despite the anger simmering beneath his professional composure. "This is beyond protocol," he said to Chen. "We don't take tactical advice from criminals." "Maybe that's why we keep losing people," Webb offered, leaning against the counter. His youth made him bold where others held back. "Did you see how he read the operational map?" "That wasn't a lucky guess." Chen shook her head. "Criminal enterprises operate differently. They think in terms of profit and loss, not duty and honor." "Do they?" Webb held up his phone, showing a photo he'd discreetly taken. That tattoo on his wrist. "That's a pilot's wing. Specifically, an A-10 Thunderbolt designation. not something you buy in a tattoo parlor. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a spent casing. Back in the briefing room, Reynolds had pulled a chair closer to Moretti, abandoning the formal distance of command. I'm going to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. Where'd you learn to read tactical formations like that? Books, Moretti replied without hesitation. Bullshit. Reynolds pulled out a tablet, swiped to a complex battle map. This is a three-dimensional combat scenario. Multiple variables, fluid conditions. You spotted the vulnerability in under 30 seconds. That's not theoretical knowledge, that's combat experience. Moretti studied the map, his finger tracing a route along the eastern approach. Here, if you come in low, using the ridgeline for cover, you can bypass the primary defenses. It'll cost you surprise, but you'll keep your men alive. Why are you helping us? Because I remember what it's like to watch good people die for bad decisions. Moretti pushed the tablet back across the table. And because maybe, just once, I'd like to be on the right side of something. The door opened. Harrison entered with Webb and Chen, their faces showing a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Reynolds nodded for them to sit. Mr. Moretti has provided us with an alternative approach, Reynolds announced. Lieutenant Harrison, I want you to run war game scenarios using both plans. We'll evaluate which has better odds. Harrison's protest was immediate. Sir, with all respect, that's an order, Commander. For the next 2 hours, they worked through simulations. Moretti's approach consistently resulted in fewer casualties, though it required precision timing and perfect intelligence. The room's skepticism gradually shifted to grudging respect. During a water break, Chen approached Moretti. That tattoo on your wrist, where'd you serve? Who says I served? His deflection was smooth, but his body language tensed fractionally. The way you stand, the way you assess exits, the fact that you understood military aviation defense patterns without hesitation. Chen leaned against the table. You weren't just military. You were air support, weren't you? Moretti's silence was its own answer. Webb pulled up a classified database on his tablet, running a search he probably didn't have clearance for. His eyes widened. Admiral, I think you need to see this. Reynolds came over, reading the screen. His face went rigid. Clear the room. Everyone except Moretti. The officers exchanged confused glances but complied. When the door closed, Reynolds turned back to Moretti, his voice low and dangerous. Before you were Vincent Moretti, Mafia boss. Who were you? The silence stretched between them like a tripwire, tension coiling in the empty briefing room. Outside, the desert wind pressed against the reinforced glass, a sound like the world trying to force its way inside. Reynolds circled the table slowly, each footstep deliberate. I've been doing this job for 30 years. I've learned to read people the way you read that tactical map. And everything about you screams military discipline, despite the expensive suit and the criminal record. Moretti remained seated, hands folded on the table, the picture of composure. But Reynolds noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his breathing had become more controlled. So let me ask you again, Reynolds continued, stopping directly across from him. And this time, I want the truth. Where did you learn to think like one of my operators? You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me. Moretti looked up then, and for the first time Reynolds saw past the hardened exterior to something older, something haunted. You asked me earlier if I had a call sign. Made a joke of it. I remember. You want to know what it was? Moretti stood slowly, facing Reynolds at eye level. It was Lone Eagle. The name hit Reynolds like a fist to the sternum. He took an involuntary step backward, his hand reaching for the table edge for support. That's not possible, isn't it? Lone Eagle was KIA, 9 years ago. Afghanistan. Operation Silent Wing. Reynolds' voice cracked slightly. He went down over hostile territory. They never recovered the body. They never looked that hard. Reynolds' mind raced through memory and impossibility. Lone Eagle had been a legend among the pilots, an A-10 Thunderbolt driver with an almost supernatural ability to provide close air support in impossible conditions. He'd saved dozens of SEAL teams, earning a reputation that bordered on mythological. And 9 years ago, he'd vanished in a ball of fire and smoke over the Hindu Kush. You're claiming to be Major Jack Brennan? Reynolds' military bearing reasserted itself, suspicion hardening his features. The pilot who disobeyed direct orders to extract, who got himself shot down trying to be a hero. I'm claiming to be the pilot who saved your men when everyone else had written them off. Moretti's voice carried no pride, only weary fact. SEAL Team 7. You were pinned down in a valley with no air support because command decided the risk was too high. I flew in anyway. Reynolds felt the blood drain from his face. He'd been the commander of that team. He'd watched his men die one by one in that valley, until an A-10 had appeared out of nowhere, guns blazing, giving them the few minutes they needed to reach the extraction point. 12 men had entered that valley. 4 had made it out. Reynolds had been one of them. The pilot who saved us died in the exfiltration, Reynolds said, but his voice had lost its certainty. The aircraft was hit by a surface-to-air missile. There was no ejection, no beacon. There was an ejection, Moretti corrected quietly. And a very different kind of extraction than you were told about. Reynolds moved to the door, locked it, then pulled the blinds on the observation window. When he turned back, his face had aged 10 years. Start talking, and don't leave anything out. Moretti unbuttoned his cuff, rolling up his sleeve to reveal more of the tattoo web had spotted not just pilots' wings, but an entire scene rendered in precise detail. An A-10 Thunderbolt diving through storm clouds, lightning reflecting off its wings. Beneath it, coordinates and a date. The date of Operation Silent Wing. I ejected, Moretti began, his voice taking on the cadence of a mission debrief. Landed in hostile territory, 3 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder. I had my survival kit, my sidearm, and about 6 hours before the search parties found me. So what happened? I was found. Just not by who I expected. Moretti's jaw tightened. A CIA contractor team was operating in the region. Black operation, officially non-existent. They pulled me out, patched me up, and explained my situation. Which was that Operation Silent Wing was a disaster from the start. Bad intel, worse planning, and a command structure more interested in covering their asses than admitting mistakes. Moretti's eyes went distant, seeing something 9 years past. My unauthorized flight had saved your team, yes, but it had also exposed the operational failures that got the others killed. I was inconvenient evidence. Reynolds sank into a chair, the weight of the revelation crushing down on him. They killed your identity. Officially declared Kia. My service record sealed under national security protocols. My family told I'd died a hero. Moretti's voice carried no emotion now, just the flat recitation of facts. The CIA offered me a choice. Disappear into a new life with their backing, or face court-martial for disobeying orders and potentially get buried in a military prison to protect the brass who'd made the real mistakes. So you chose to disappear. I chose to survive. Moretti rolled his sleeve back down. They gave me a new identity, seed money, and connections in Eastern Europe. What I did with those resources was up to me. You became a criminal. I became someone who understood that the world isn't divided into good guys and bad guys. It's divided into people who survive and people who don't. Moretti met Reynolds' gaze directly. But I kept certain principles. The organizations I run, we don't deal in drugs. We don't traffic children. We don't work with terrorists. There are lines I won't cross. Reynolds stood, pacing to the window. Outside, he could see his operators running drills in the training yard, their movements precise and coordinated. Why come back now? Why risk exposure? Because I've been watching your operations in Eastern Europe, and I've seen you making the same mistakes that got people killed 9 years ago. Moretti joined him at the window. Textbook tactics against an enemy that's evolved past textbooks. You're going to lose more teams if you don't adapt. And you think you can help? I know I can. Because I've spent 9 years operating in the same spaces you're trying to infiltrate. I know the terrain, the players, the power structures. Moretti turned to face him. I know what the enemy will do before they do it, because I've had to think like them to survive. Reynolds studied the man who'd once been Major Jack Brennan, seeing past the tailored suit to the pilot who'd saved his life. If what you're saying is true, if you really are Lone Eagle, why should I trust you? You've spent nearly a decade as exactly the kind of criminal we're supposed to be fighting. You shouldn't trust me, Moretti said simply. You should use me. My knowledge, my networks, my understanding of how the criminal underworld operates. Use it to save your men. That's all I'm offering. And what do you get out of it? Moretti was quiet for a long moment. Maybe a chance to remember who I used to be. Before the government I served decided I was more valuable dead than alive. Reynolds made his decision. I need to verify your story. That's going to take time. I expected nothing less. Until then, you're confined to quarters on this base. Armed guard, full surveillance. Understood. Reynolds moved to the door, then paused. One more thing. The call sign Lone Eagle. Why that name? For the first time, something like a smile crossed Moretti's face, though it carried more sadness than humor. Because in the end, we all fly alone, Admiral. The only question is whether we fly towards something worth dying for. Reynolds spent 3 hours in his private office, surrounded by classified files and secure communications equipment. The verification process had to be handled delicately, digging into black operations from 9 years ago, meant navigating bureaucratic minefields and calling in favors from intelligence contacts who owed him discretion. While he worked, his mind kept drifting back to that day in Afghanistan. The memory had been buried under years of subsequent operations, but now it returned with crystalline clarity. The valley had been a death trap. SEAL Team 7 had gone in to capture a high-value target based on intelligence that turned out to be 12 hours old. By the time they'd breached the compound, the target had fled, and enemy reinforcements had them surrounded. Reynolds remembered the sound of bullets striking rock, the screams of his men over the radio, the growing certainty that they wouldn't make it out. Command had denied close air support. Too risky, they'd said. The weather was deteriorating. The enemy had surface-to-air capabilities, and the cost-benefit analysis didn't favor putting aircraft at risk for a team that was likely already lost. Reynolds had been preparing to make his last stand when he'd heard it, the distinctive sound of an Atenz Gauate Avenger cannon, a sound like the world being torn apart. The thunderbolt had appeared through the clouds like an avenging angel, its cannon fire walking across enemy positions with surgical precision. The pilot's voice had crackled over the radio, calm and professional despite flying through a storm of hostile fire. SEAL 7, this is Lone Eagle. Consider this your Uber. Hope you don't mind if I clear some traffic first. That voice. Reynolds realized now it matched Moretti's cadence, that same controlled calm under pressure. The A-10 had made 3 passes, each one drawing more enemy fire but buying precious minutes for the team to reach the extraction point. On the 3rd pass, Reynolds had seen the missile launch, watched the smoke trail arc upward, witnessed the bright flash of impact. The aircraft had disappeared into the clouds, trailing smoke and fire. No ejection beacon, no radio contact, just the assumption of death. But assumptions, Reynolds now understood, were dangerous things in the world of black operations and political convenience. His secure phone buzzed. The number showed no caller ID, but Reynolds recognized the encryption protocol. Reynolds. Tom. The voice belonged to Daniel Marcus, a CIA deputy director who'd served with Reynolds years ago in Iraq. Got your inquiry about Operation Silent Wing. That's a deep hole you're digging in. I need to know what really happened to Major Brennan. A long pause. What makes you think the official story isn't accurate? Because the official story is standing in my compound right now, claiming to be alive and calling himself Vincent Moretti. The silence on the other end stretched for 10 seconds. Then, where are you having this conversation? Secure line. Encrypted. Private office. Not secure enough. I'll be there in 6 hours. Don't let Brennan or whoever he is out of your sight. And Tom? If this is who you think it is, you're opening a door that some very powerful people worked very hard to close. The line went dead. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at him. 9 years. 9 years of believing the man who'd saved his life had died doing it. 9 years of carrying that guilt. Of wondering if he could have done something differently. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Harrison entered, carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who'd discovered something they wished they hadn't. Sir, I ran the database check on Vincent Moretti like you asked. His fingerprints aren't in our military system. That proves nothing. They could have been scrubbed. That's just it, sir. They were scrubbed. Poorly. Harrison set the tablet on the desk. I found the deletion records. Someone purged a set of fingerprints from the Air Force personnel database 9 years ago, but they left digital traces. Whoever did it wasn't expecting anyone to look this hard. Reynolds studied the screen. Can you recover the original prints? Already did. Took some creative database archaeology, but I pulled them from a backup server that apparently no one remembered existed. Harrison pulled up a comparison image. Sir, those prints belong to Major Jack Brennan, the pilot who flew as Lone Eagle. Jesus Christ. There's more. Harrison swiped to another file. I pulled Brennan's service record before it was classified. His performance evaluations, his mission logs, everything. Sir, this guy was one of the best combat pilots in the Air Force. multiple decorations, perfect mission success rate, and a reputation for taking on the impossible missions. Reynolds read through the records, seeing the portrait of a pilot who'd embodied everything the military claimed to value: courage, skill, dedication to protecting those on the ground. So why was he erased? I found a classified after-action report from Operation Silent Wing. It's heavily redacted, but the summary is clear enough. Command denied close air support for your team. Brennan requested permission to provide CAS anyway. Permission denied. He launched unauthorized. To save my men. To save your men, Harrison confirmed. But in doing so, he exposed the fact that command had written off your team, made some very senior officers look very bad. 3 weeks after the operation, there was a quiet purge of personnel records, and suddenly Major Brennan had never existed beyond his death certificate. Reynolds felt anger building in his chest, the hot rage of betrayal. They killed him on paper to cover their own asses. That would be my assessment, sir. Has anyone else seen this? Just me. I figured you'd want to control information flow on this. Good instinct. Reynolds stood. Keep this to yourself. I've got someone coming in from Langley. Until then, we proceed as if Moretti is just a consultant with unusual expertise. And if he really is Brennan, then we figure out how to give a dead man his life back without starting a bureaucratic war we can't win. After Harrison left, Reynolds made his way to the secured quarters where Moretti was being held. 2 armed guards stood outside, their presence more symbolic than necessary if Moretti had wanted to leave. Reynolds suspected the man had the skills to do it. Inside, he found Moretti standing at the window, looking out at the darkening desert sky. The man turned as Reynolds entered, his expression unreadable. Your people are thorough, Moretti observed. I've counted 3 surveillance cameras and at least 2 listening devices since I've been in here. Standard protocol for unknown assets. Is that what I am? An asset? Reynolds moved to stand beside him at the window. I verified your story. Or at least, I verified that Major Jack Brennan's records were scrubbed from official databases 9 years ago, right after Operation Silent Wing. And I have someone coming who might be able to fill in the gaps. Reynolds studied Moretti's reflection in the glass. But I need to know something first. In all these years, did you ever think about coming back? Making your survival known? Every day, Moretti admitted quietly. And every day, I realized it would accomplish nothing. The people who made me disappear are still in power. The system that valued political convenience over a pilot's life hasn't changed. Coming back would just put a target on my back and endanger anyone I cared about. So why now? Because I've watched you lose 3 teams in the past year, to the same kind of thinking that almost killed you in Afghanistan. Bad intelligence, rigid tactics, commanders more worried about their careers than their people. Moretti turned to face him. I may not wear the uniform anymore, but I still remember what it meant. I remember why I was willing to die for it. Honor. Something like that. Moretti's voice carried a weight of years. You asked me earlier why I kept certain principles in the criminal world. It's because principles are all I had left of who I used to be. I couldn't be Major Brennan anymore, but I could be someone who still gave a damn about protecting people. Reynolds was quiet for a moment, then, that valley in Afghanistan. When you came in unauthorized, did you know you probably wouldn't make it out? I knew the odds were bad. Surface-to-air missiles, heavy ground fire, deteriorating weather conditions. Moretti's expression was distant, but I also knew that if I didn't try, 12 men would die for certain. So the math was simple. The math was suicide. The math was necessary. Moretti met his gaze. And I'd do it again. Even knowing what it cost me, I'd make the same choice. For the first time since learning the truth, Reynolds felt the certainty settle in his bones. This was Lone Eagle. Not just the genetic match of fingerprints or the corroboration of records, but the fundamental character of a man who'd sacrifice everything for people he'd never met. The CIA is sending someone, Reynolds said. He'll be here in a few hours. He's going to want to know why a dead man is walking around my compound. And what are you going to tell him? That I need you. That my men need you. That whatever political games were played 9 years ago, they end now. Moretti's laugh was dry, without humor. You think it's that simple? That you can just reinstate a ghost? No. But I think I can protect someone who's trying to do the right thing, even if his methods have been unconventional. Unconventional is a generous word for running criminal enterprises. I've seen your operations, Reynolds said. Harrison pulled together intelligence on the Moretti organization. You run protection rackets, smuggling operations, influence networks across Eastern Europe. But you know what's interesting? None of your operations have resulted in civilian casualties. None of them have involved terrorist organizations or hostile state actors. In fact, there are 3 instances in the past 5 years where your people actively prevented attacks on Western targets. You think that makes me a good guy? I think it makes you complicated, which is more than I can say for most of the people we work with. Reynolds moved toward the door, then paused. Get some rest. Tomorrow, things are going to get very complicated very quickly. Admiral? Reynolds turned back. Thank you, Moretti said simply. For listening, for believing. Not everyone would. You saved my life once. Figure I owe you at least the chance to tell your story. As Reynolds left, he heard Moretti's voice, barely audible. I just wish the story had a better ending. Daniel Marcus arrived at dawn, stepping out of an unmarked SUV wearing civilian clothes and carrying a briefcase that Reynolds knew contained classified files dating back a decade. They'd served together in Iraq, back when Marcus was still field operations and Reynolds was running counter-terrorism missions. They'd learned to trust each other in the kind of circumstances that forged either deep loyalty or bitter enemies. They met in Reynolds' private office, the space deliberately chosen for its isolation from the rest of the compound. Marcus set his briefcase on the desk but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he poured himself coffee from the pot Reynolds had prepared and spent a long minute staring out the window at the desert sunrise. Before we start, Marcus said finally, I need to know how confident you are about this identification. Fingerprints match, voice patterns match from archived recordings, physical description matches, tattoo matches service records. Reynolds ticked off the points. And the tactical knowledge, Dan. This guy reads operational situations like he's been living them. Because he has been. Just on the wrong side of the law. Marcus turned from the window. Do you understand what you're asking me to confirm? The political fallout alone. I understand that a good man got erased to protect bad decisions. I understand that the pilot who saved my team was declared dead as a bureaucratic convenience. Reynolds' voice hardened. And I understand that if he's here trying to help us now, we owe him more than another betrayal. Marcus sighed, opening his briefcase. The official story about Operation Silent Wing was always incomplete. What I'm about to tell you is compartmented information. It doesn't leave this room. Understood. Major Jack Brennan was one of the best combat pilots we had. He was also becoming a problem. Marcus pulled out a file, sliding it across the desk. 6 months before Silent Wing, he'd filed 3 separate incident reports questioning tactical decisions made by senior command. Each time, his concerns turned out to be valid. Each time, it made people above him look incompetent. Reynolds scanned the reports. They detailed operations where rigid adherence to planned tactics had resulted in unnecessary casualties, where Brennan suggested modifications submitted before the missions would have saved lives. He was making enemies by being right, Reynolds observed. Exactly. And then came Silent Wing. Marcus pulled out another file, this one thicker and heavily redacted. Your team was sent in on intelligence that several people, including Brennan, thought was questionable. He expressed concerns during the pre-mission briefing. Those concerns were noted and ignored. The target had already moved. We walked into an ambush. An entirely predictable ambush, according to Brennan's analysis. Marcus's expression was grim. Command denied air support because they'd decided cutting losses was preferable to admitting they'd sent you in on bad intel. Brennan requested permission to launch anyway. Permission explicitly denied. He launched anyway. Flew through conditions that should have been impossible, provided close air support that saved 4 lives, and got shot down in the process. Marcus leaned back. And that's where it gets complicated. Reynolds felt his chest tighten. Tell me. Brennan ejected successfully. We had his beacon, his coordinates, everything we needed for SAR. But before we could launch the rescue operation, orders came down from very high up to stand down. No rescue attempt. They left him there? Reynolds' voice was barely controlled. Left an American pilot in hostile territory? They left him there to die, Marcus confirmed flatly. The reasoning was simple and brutal. A live Brennan would mean an inquiry, testimony, public scrutiny of decisions that had cost lives. A dead Brennan was a hero, a closed file, a convenient end to an embarrassing situation. But he didn't, No, he didn't. Marcus pulled out a final document, this one bearing CIA classification stamps. My predecessor ran a black operation in that region. When they picked up Brennan's beacon, they made a decision without authorization. They extracted him. Why? Because they recognized value when they saw it. A combat pilot with Brennan's skills, now legally dead, with every motivation to disappear and no ties to hold him back, he was potentially useful. Marcus's tone carried distaste for the calculation. They pulled him out, provided medical care, and gave him an ultimatum. Reynolds read the document, each line making his anger grow. Work for them or face court-martial for disobeying orders. Effectively. Though the court-martial threat was largely theatrical, the charges wouldn't have stuck given the circumstances. But Brennan didn't know that. He was injured, traumatized, and had just been abandoned by the military he'd risked everything for. So he took the deal. CIA gave him a new identity, seed money, and cut him loose in Eastern Europe, with the understanding that he might occasionally be called on for services. Marcus closed his briefcase. What they didn't anticipate was that Brennan would build his own independent power base. The Moretti organization operates completely outside our control. Reynolds stood, pacing the small office. 9 years. 9 years we let everyone believe he was dead. Let his family grieve. Let the system that betrayed him continue operating. The system that betrayed him included some very senior people. Generals, politicians, people who've moved even higher now. Marcus's voice carried warning. If you push this, Tom, if you try to expose what really happened, you're going to make powerful enemies. I don't care. You should. Because those enemies can destroy careers, classify entire operations out of existence, and make problems disappear. Marcus stood, facing him directly. I'm not saying don't do the right thing. I'm saying understand the cost. What would you do? If you were in my position? Marcus considered carefully. I'd use him. Get the intelligence we need to save lives. Keep his real identity compartmented. Tell your team he's a consultant with unusual background. When the operation is over, give him the choice of what happens next. And if he wants his life back, his name back, then we fight that battle. But not yet. Not when we're about to launch operations that could benefit from his knowledge. Marcus moved toward the door. One more thing, Tom. The people who made the decision to abandon Brennan, some of them, are still in positions to make similar decisions. If they learn he's alive and talking, they might decide to clean up that loose end permanently. Are you saying? I'm saying be careful who you trust. And watch your back, because helping a dead man come back to life tends to make some people very nervous. After Marcus left, Reynolds made his way to Moretti's quarters. The morning sun was fully up now, casting harsh light across the compound. He found Moretti exactly where he'd left him, standing at the window, though the man's posture suggested he hadn't slept. Your CIA friend left quickly, Moretti observed without turning. I'm guessing the conversation didn't go well. He confirmed your story, all of it. Reynolds entered the room, closing the door behind him. You were right. They left you there to die, made you disappear to cover their mistakes. And now you know the truth. What happens? Now we put you to work. Reynolds pulled up a chair. We have operations planned in Eastern Europe. Based on what Marcus told me, and what I've seen of your capabilities, I think you can help us save lives. In exchange for what? In exchange for the truth being on record, for your service being acknowledged, even if it can't be made public yet. Reynolds met his gaze. And in exchange for the chance to remember who you were before they took it all away. Moretti turned from the window, and Reynolds saw something he hadn't expected. Tears, barely contained, in the eyes of a man who'd spent 9 years believing he'd lost everything. I don't even know if I can be that person anymore, Moretti said quietly. Jack Brennan died in that valley. Vincent Moretti is all that's left. I don't think that's true. I think the man who flew into hell to save people he'd never met is still in there. He just needs a reason to come back. And you think this operation will provide that reason? I think doing what's right, regardless of the cost, is who you've always been. The uniform didn't make you that way. Neither did the call sign. Reynolds stood. You're Lone Eagle because you're willing to fly alone when everyone else turns back. That's not about military service. That's about character. Moretti was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do you need from me? Everything you know about criminal networks in Eastern Europe. Every contact, every operational detail, every vulnerability. Reynolds pulled out a tablet. We're going after a trafficking network that's moved over 200 people in the past year. They're protected by local corruption and backed by elements we haven't been able to identify. I know them. Moretti took the tablet, scanning the intelligence brief. They call themselves the Collective. They're worse than you think. How much worse? Bad enough that even other criminal organizations won't work with them. They deal in human misery trafficking, organ harvesting, forced labor. No ethics, no limits. Moretti's expression darkened. I've been trying to shut them down for 3 years, but they're protected at levels I can't reach. What if you had military backing? Resources, intelligence, operational support? Then we might actually have a chance. Moretti looked up from the tablet. But Admiral, if we do this, we do it right. No half measures, no political compromises. We take them down completely, or we don't move at all. Agreed. And one more thing. Moretti's voice hardened. If this goes sideways, if someone decides I'm too much of a liability, you get your people out first. I've been dead for 9 years. I can disappear again if necessary. That's not going to happen. You don't know that. The same people who erased me once won't hesitate to do it again. Moretti handed back the tablet. Just promise me, if it comes down to it, you'll prioritize the mission and your people over protecting me. Reynolds wanted to argue, to insist that no one would be left behind. But he'd learned in 30 years of service that sometimes promises couldn't be kept, and false assurances were worse than hard truths. I promise, he said finally, that I'll do everything in my power to make sure you don't have to disappear again. That's the best I can offer. That's more than anyone else has offered in 9 years. They spent the next 4 hours going through operational details. Moretti's knowledge of the Collective's operations was comprehensive: safe houses, transportation routes, personnel structure, financial networks. He drew maps from memory, identified vulnerabilities that intelligence gathering had missed, and outlined approaches that combined his criminal world insight with his military training. By the time they finished, Reynolds had the foundation for an operation that might actually succeed where previous attempts had failed. We'll need to brief the team, Reynolds said. They'll want to know why we're suddenly changing our entire operational approach. Tell them you found a consultant with specialized knowledge. You don't need to tell them who I really am. They already know something's unusual about you. Webb spotted your tattoo. Harrison pulled your deleted service records. Then tell them enough to satisfy their curiosity, but not enough to compromise operational security. Moretti stood, stretching tired muscles. The fewer people who know the full truth, the safer everyone is. Reynolds nodded slowly. One last question. The name Vincent Moretti, where did it come from? A flicker of something pain, perhaps, or memory crossed Moretti's face. Vincent was my grandfather's name. He immigrated from Italy, worked his whole life as an honest man, believed in doing right even when it was hard. He paused. Moretti means dark or Moorish. Seemed fitting for someone living in the shadows. Your grandfather would be proud of what you're doing now. My grandfather would be horrified at what I've become. But maybe he'd understand why. As Reynolds prepared to leave, Moretti spoke again. Admiral? Thank you for giving me this chance. I know it's not easy, protecting someone like me. You protected my men when no one else would. That makes you exactly the kind of person worth protecting. Reynolds left Moretti alone with his thoughts and his ghosts. Outside, the compound was coming to life: operators running drills, helicopters conducting training flights, the machinery of military precision in constant motion. Somewhere in that machinery, Reynolds knew, were people who'd want Lone Eagle to stay dead. People who'd see his resurrection as a threat to their careers, their legacies, their carefully constructed narratives about duty and honor. But Reynolds had learned something in 30 years of service. Honor wasn't about protecting institutions or maintaining comfortable lives. It was about standing with the people who'd stood with you, even when the cost was high. Especially when the cost was high. He pulled out his phone and called Harrison. Assemble the team. We've got planning to do. The operation against the Collective? Yes. And Commander? We're going to need to prep the bird hangar. Someone's going to want to inspect our A-10 inventory. There was a pause on the line. Sir, are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying we might need close air support on this operation, and I want our best pilot in the air. Harrison's voice carried understanding and concern in equal measure. Sir, that could expose. I know what it could expose, but saving lives matters more than keeping secrets. Reynolds ended the call, looking up at the clear desert sky. Somewhere up there, 9 years ago, a pilot named Lone Eagle had flown into impossible odds to save people who'd been abandoned by their own command. That pilot had been declared dead, erased, forgotten by everyone except the men he'd saved. It was time to remind the world why call signs like Lone Eagle became legends in the first place. The briefing room filled with controlled chaos over the next 2 days. Maps covered every wall. Digital displays showed satellite imagery of targets across Eastern Europe, and Harrison's team worked around the clock building operational plans based on Moretti's intelligence. Reynolds watched his officers, initially skeptical of the consultant, gradually develop grudging respect as Moretti demonstrated knowledge that no amount of external intelligence gathering could have provided. He knew which border guards could be bribed, which officials were already compromised, which routes the collective used to move human cargo. But more than that, he knew how criminals thought the psychology of organizations built on fear and profit rather than discipline and duty. It gave the SEAL team insights they'd never had before. The collective's primary compound is here, Moretti indicated on the map, pointing to a location outside Bucharest. 3 rings of security. The outer ring is local thugs, disposable muscle. Second ring is professional security, former military from various countries. Inner ring is the leadership and their personal protection. These guys are legitimately dangerous. Lieutenant Chen studied the satellite imagery. Traditional approach would be to breach the outer perimeter under cover of darkness, neutralize security sequentially, extract targets before reinforcements arrive. That approach will get your people killed, Moretti stated flatly. The outer ring is designed to look vulnerable. It's bait. The moment you breach, the second ring collapses inward and you're caught in a kill box. So what do you suggest? Webb asked, his earlier suspicion tempered by curiosity. You don't breach. You infiltrate. Moretti pulled up additional imagery. There's a supply convoy that enters the compound every 48 hours. Food, equipment, basic necessities. The convoy is searched, but not thoroughly. They're more worried about bombs and weapons than people. Harrison leaned forward. You're suggesting we smuggle operators inside? 2 operators, maximum. The rest of the team positions for extraction outside. The internal team locates the captives, marks the holding areas with IR beacons, and when the time is right, Moretti made a descending motion with his hand. Airstrike, Reynolds finished. Precision strike. Take out the security command center and the vehicle pool simultaneously. In the confusion, the ground team extracts the captives through the chaos. Chen shook her head. That requires perfect timing and coordination. Any delay, any miscommunication, and our people inside are dead. Yes, Moretti agreed simply. Which is why you need someone flying air support who understands ground operations, someone who can adjust in real time based on what's actually happening, rather than what the plan says should be happening. We have drone support available, Harrison pointed out. Precision munitions, no risk to pilots. Drones can't react to a firefight happening in real time. They can't make split-second adjustments when the situation changes. Moretti met Harrison's gaze. You need a pilot who's willing to get low, get close, and put themselves between your people and the threat. The implication hung in the room. Reynolds saw his officers making the connection. This consultant wasn't just providing intelligence. He was offering himself. Webb spoke carefully. Sir, are we seriously considering putting a civilian in a combat aircraft? Before Reynolds could answer, Moretti laughed a harsh, bitter sound. Lieutenant, I've logged more combat hours in an A-10 than most active pilots. The fact that I'm currently not wearing a uniform doesn't change muscle memory or training. But you're not current. Quals, certifications, mission readiness, all of which can be verified. Reynolds cut off the debate. Moretti will undergo full evaluation. If he can't demonstrate proficiency, we stick with conventional air support. But if he can, Reynolds let the possibility rest. Harrison pulled Reynolds aside after the briefing. Sir, with all respect, this is insane. We're talking about putting a Mafia boss in a military aircraft for a combat operation. No. We're talking about putting the pilot who saved my life in the aircraft he was born to fly. Reynolds kept his voice low. I know how this looks, Jake. I know all the regulations we're bending. But tell me honestly, do you trust drone support to keep our people alive if this goes wrong? Harrison was quiet. Then, no, sir. I don't. Neither do I. Which means we need someone in that cockpit who gives a damn about the people on the ground. Someone who's proven they'll sacrifice everything to bring them home. Even if it means ending your career? Even then. That afternoon, Reynolds and Moretti made their way to the flight line where 3 A-10 Thunderbolts sat in their reinforced hangar. The distinctive profile of the aircraft, blunt nose, forward landing gear, massive GAU-8 cannon dominating the fuselage, made them look less like modern weapon systems and more like flying tanks. Which, Reynolds knew, was exactly the point. Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Rodriguez, the senior maintenance chief, met them at the hangar entrance. She was 53, had been maintaining combat aircraft for 3 decades, and had a reputation for suffering no fools and accepting no compromises on safety. "Admiral," she greeted Reynolds, then turned to assess Moretti with the critical eye of someone who'd seen countless pilots claim capabilities they didn't possess. "And you must be the consultant who thinks he can fly my birds." "Master Chief." Moretti extended his hand. "I wouldn't presume to fly anything without your approval." Rodriguez's expression softened fractionally at the show of respect. "Come on then, let's see if you remember which end the bullets come out of." They walked through the hangar, Rodriguez explaining the current status of each aircraft. 2 were fully mission-ready, the 3rd undergoing routine maintenance. Moretti listened carefully, asking technical questions that demonstrated knowledge not just of the A-10 systems but of their quirks and limitations. "These birds are old," Rodriguez observed. "Newer pilots sometimes struggle with the less automated systems." "Old means reliable," Moretti replied. "Means if something breaks, you can fix it with tools and skill instead of needing a computer technician." Rodriguez almost smiled. "You might actually know what you're talking about." At the 3rd aircraft, Moretti stopped, his hand reaching out to touch the fuselage beneath the cockpit. His fingers traced over a patch of slightly different colored paint, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. "This one took damage," he said softly. "Battle damage. Here and here." His hand moved to 2 other spots. Whoever repaired it knew what they were doing. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I know this aircraft." Moretti's voice had changed, becoming distant. "Tail number 80 to 0197, deployed to Afghanistan, assigned to the 354th Fighter Squadron. Took 37mm anti-aircraft fire over Kandahar province 9 years ago." He looked up at the tail. "I was flying it." Rodriguez stepped back, studying Moretti with new understanding. She pulled out her tablet, checking maintenance records. Her face went carefully neutral. "This aircraft was flown by Major Jack Brennan," Moretti finished. "Call sign Lone Eagle. That was me." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was wind whistling through the hangar and the distant noise of the flight line. Finally, Rodriguez spoke, her voice tight with emotion. "I was part of the maintenance crew that repaired this bird after it came back from Operation Silent Wing. The damage was..." She paused. "We didn't think anyone could have flown this thing back to base in that condition. Hydraulics shot. Half the control surfaces compromised. Engine running on prayers and spite. She got me close enough," Moretti said quietly. "Close enough that the team made it out. They told us the pilot died in the crash. They told you what they needed to tell you." Rodriguez walked around the aircraft slowly, her hand trailing over panels she'd personally replaced 9 years ago. "If you're really Brennan, then you know this bird better than anyone alive. Every repair we made, every modification, every quirk in her handling characteristics. Port engine runs slightly hot," Moretti said. "Compensate by enriching fuel mixture by 3% above normal. Rudder trim is sticky. In the last 5 degrees of left deflection, there's a cable that needs another quarter turn of tension. And if you fire the gun at angles above 30 degrees nose down, you'll get a slight yaw to starboard from the recoil torque." Rodriguez's professional composure cracked. "Jesus Christ, it really is you. What's left of me?" She turned to Reynolds. "Admiral, if this man says he can fly this aircraft, I believe him. More than that, I trust him with it." "Then let's see if he's current," Reynolds said. "Master Chief, can you have this bird pre-flighted for evaluation tomorrow morning?" "Consider it done, sir." As they left the hangar, Moretti paused at the entrance, looking back at the A-10 that had been his last official flight. "You kept her flying all these years. These birds are too valuable to retire," Rodriguez replied. "Close air support like this, there's nothing that can replace it. The new fighters are faster, stealthier. But when you need someone to get low and protect ground forces," she patted the aircraft's fuselage, "this is still the best we have." "How does it feel?" Reynolds asked as they walked back toward the operations center. "Seeing your aircraft again after all this time?" Moretti was quiet for a long moment, like seeing a photo of yourself from before everything changed. You recognize the person, but they feel like a stranger now. Maybe it's time to get reacquainted. That evening, Reynolds found himself in his quarters, unable to sleep despite exhaustion. His secure phone buzzed a message from Marcus at the CIA. Heard you're planning something ambitious. Be careful, Tom. People are watching. Reynolds typed back. Let them watch. Sometimes the right thing is worth the scrutiny. The response came quickly. Just make sure you're ready for the consequences. And Tom? Keep him alive. He deserves better than what we gave him the first time. Reynolds set the phone down, thinking about consequences and costs. In 30 years of service, he'd learned that doing the right thing was rarely easy, rarely clean, and rarely came without sacrifice. But it was always worth it. The next morning dawned clear and cold, perfect flying weather. Reynolds stood on the flight line with Harrison, Chen, and Webb, watching as Moretti conducted his pre-flight inspection with Rodriguez supervising. The man moved around the aircraft with practiced efficiency, checking control surfaces, examining engine intakes, verifying weapon systems. He looks natural out there, Webb observed, like he never stopped. Muscle memory, Chen replied. Some things, your body doesn't forget. Moretti climbed into the cockpit, Rodriguez securing the canopy. The A-10's engines spooled up, their distinctive turbofan whine cutting through the morning air. The aircraft taxied to the runway, and Reynolds moved to the control tower to monitor. Tower. This is Lone Eagle requesting permission for evaluation flight. The call sign sent a chill through Reynolds. For 9 years that name had been silent. Now it was back, as if time had folded and the past was reaching forward into the present. Lone Eagle, you're cleared for takeoff. Maintain pattern altitude, weapons cold, standard evaluation profile. The A-10 accelerated down the runway, its twin engines pushing the heavily armored aircraft into the air with surprising grace. Once airborne, Moretti put the plane through its pace's tight turns, rapid altitude changes, approaches and pulls, everything needed to demonstrate proficiency. Rodriguez stood beside Reynolds in the tower, watching her screens. His handling is better than most of our active pilots. Smoother on the controls, more efficient with energy management. Experience, Reynolds said. More than that. This is someone who's flown this aircraft in actual combat, made split-second decisions with lives on the line. Rodriguez pointed to a readout. Look at that approach angle. Perfect parameters for ground attack. Every time. That's not just skill. That's someone who's done it when it mattered. For 40 minutes, Moretti flew evaluation patterns. Then his voice came over the radio again. Tower, requesting permission for 1 gun run. Inert rounds, authorized range. Reynolds nodded to the controller. Approved. Lone Eagle, you're cleared hot on range 3. The A-10 banked sharply, diving toward the gunnery range 3 miles from the field. Through binoculars, Reynolds watched the aircraft line up on the target array old vehicles, arranged to simulate enemy positions. The GAU-8 cannon erupted, its distinctive brar sound rolling across the desert like thunder. 7 seconds of fire, 70 rounds, and when the dust cleared, every target had been precisely hit. Not area saturation surgical strikes, each burst exactly where it needed to be. Holy shit, Webb breathed. That's the best gun run I've ever seen. That's what happens when the pilot cares more about the people they're protecting than the score they're achieving, Reynolds said quietly. Moretti brought the aircraft back, landing with the kind of smoothness that spoke to thousands of hours of practice. After shutdown, he climbed out of the cockpit, his face showing the strain of concentration, but also something else, a kind of peace that hadn't been there before. Rodriguez met him at the aircraft. How'd she feel? Like coming home, Moretti replied simply. Reynolds approached, Harrison and his team following. That was one hell of an evaluation. It was adequate, Moretti said with the modesty of someone who knew they'd just demonstrated mastery. The aircraft handles slightly differently than I remember. You've made some modifications, but the fundamentals are the same. So you can fly this mission? Moretti looked at the A-10, then back at Reynolds. I can fly it. The question is whether you're ready for what happens after. Once I'm in that cockpit in combat, people are going to ask questions. My cover as a consultant is going to evaporate. Let me worry about that. Admiral, I'm serious. This could end your career. Some things are more important than careers. Reynolds extended his hand. Welcome back to service, Major Brennan. Moretti looked at the offered hand for a long moment, emotions warring across his face. Then he took it, his grip firm. Lone Eagle, back on the roster. Let's bring some people home. As they walked back toward the operations center, Webb fell into step beside Moretti. I have to ask, how does it feel, flying again after all this time? Moretti considered the question. You know that feeling when you've been away from something you love, something that defined who you are? And then you come back to it and realize it's been waiting for you the whole time? He looked up at the sky. It feels like that. Like I've been holding my breath for 9 years and I can finally exhale. Why did you give it up in the first place? Even with everything that happened, couldn't you have found another way back to flying? Because flying military aircraft isn't just about skill, it's about trust. And the trust I had in the system that was supposed to protect me was shattered. Moretti's voice hardened slightly. But trust in the mission? Trust in the need to protect people on the ground? That never went away. If anything, it got stronger. That night, the team finalized operational plans. The infiltration would happen in 72 hours, timed to coincide with the regular supply convoy. 2 operators, Harrison and Chen, would enter the compound. The rest of the team would position for extraction. And when the signal came, Lone Eagle would rain precision fire from above. Reynolds pulled Moretti aside before the final briefing. There's still time to back out. We can find another way. No, there isn't. And no, you can't. Moretti's expression was calm, certain. This is what I was trained for, what I'm good at. More than that, it's what I should have been doing all along instead of building criminal empires. You did what you had to do to survive. Maybe, but survival isn't the same as living. Moretti looked toward the hangar where his aircraft waited. For 9 years, I've been surviving. Time to start living again. Even if it's only for one more mission. Reynolds wanted to argue, to insist there would be more than one mission, that they'd find a way to restore Brennan's identity and career. But the pragmatic part of him, the part shaped by 3 decades of military realism, knew better. Some resurrections were only temporary. Some ghosts could only be brought back for a moment before they faded again into whatever came after. But that didn't make the moment any less important. Then let's make it count, Reynolds said. Moretti smiled a real smile, the first genuine one Reynolds had seen from him. Admiral, when have I ever done anything else? The night before the operation, the compound fell into that peculiar kind of quiet that preceded combat, not peaceful, but tense with anticipation and controlled fear. Operators checked and rechecked their equipment, going through rituals that brought comfort in the face of uncertainty. Reynolds found Moretti in the hangar long after midnight, standing beneath the A-10 that would carry him back into combat. The overhead lights had been dimmed to conserve power, leaving only work lamps casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Rodriguez was there too, making final adjustments to weapon systems, her movements efficient and unhurried despite the late hour. Couldn't sleep? Reynolds asked, approaching quietly. Moretti didn't turn, his eyes fixed on the aircraft above him. I'm remembering the last time I flew into combat. The mission that ended with me being erased from existence. This time will be different. Will it? Moretti finally looked at him. I'm about to violate every regulation in the book. I'm legally dead, flying a military aircraft in unauthorized combat operations to rescue civilians from a criminal organization I have personal knowledge of. The paperwork alone is a nightmare. The paperwork can be classified. Everything can be classified until someone decides it's convenient to unclassify it. Moretti walked around the aircraft slowly, his hand trailing over the fuselage. But you know what? I don't care anymore. I've spent 9 years hiding, building an empire in the shadows, pretending that surviving was enough. It wasn't. Rodriguez secured a panel and descended her maintenance ladder. Bird's ready, Major. She'll fly true. I know she will, Chief. You've always taken care of her. I've taken care of her for you, Rodriguez corrected. Even when I thought you were dead, I maintained this aircraft like you might walk through that door and need her. Some of us never believed the official story. The admission hung in the air, heavy with implication. Moretti studied her face. Why not? Because pilots who fly like you flew don't make the kinds of mistakes that get them killed. They make the kinds of decisions that get them erased. Rodriguez's voice was matter-of-fact. I've been maintaining combat aircraft for 30 years. I know the difference between accident and convenience. Did you tell anyone? Who would I tell? The same command structure that declared you dead? She shook her head. I kept my mouth shut and my wrench moving. Figured if you were alive somewhere, you had your reasons for staying ghost. And if you were really dead, then maintaining your bird was the best memorial I could give you. Moretti was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, Chief. For believing. For keeping her ready. Just bring her back in one piece tomorrow. And yourself, too. Rodriguez gathered her tools. I didn't spend 9 years keeping this bird airworthy just to lose both of you again. After she left, Reynolds and Moretti stood in the hangar silence, 2 men shaped by military service and scarred by its failures. "Tell me something," Reynolds said finally. "When you flew into that valley to save my team, when you ignored the recall order and put yourself in the kill zone, what were you thinking?" Moretti leaned against the aircraft's landing gear. "I was thinking about my first deployment. I was 23, brand new, a 10 pilot, assigned to provide close air support for a Marine unit in Iraq. They'd been ambushed, taking casualties, calling for help. I was 10 minutes away, but my fuel state was borderline, and command wanted me to hold back, wait for better conditions. You didn't wait. I didn't wait. I flew in, provided the support they needed, and barely made it back to base running on fumes and adrenaline." Moretti's eyes were distant, seeing the past. "After I landed, my squadron commander tore into me, told me I was reckless, that I'd risked a multi-million-dollar aircraft for a handful of grunts, that I needed to think about the bigger picture." "What did you say?" "I said the bigger picture looked different from ground level, sir. That to the Marines I'd supported, the bigger picture was whether they lived or died in the next 5 minutes. Moretti smiled slightly. "He threatened to ground me. My wing commander overruled him, said the military needed more pilots willing to take risks for the people they were sworn to protect." "Sounds like you had a good commander." "I did. He retired 6 months before Operation Silent Wing. His replacement was one of the officers who later ordered my rescue mission canceled." The bitterness in Moretti's voice was controlled but profound. Funny how leadership changes everything. Reynolds thought about that, how the same military could produce officers who valued human life above regulations and officers who valued career protection above honor. The same institution, the same oaths, but fundamentally different interpretations of what those oaths meant. "Tomorrow," Reynolds said, "when you're in that cockpit, you'll be making decisions that could impact your future. If you expose yourself, if word gets out that a legally dead pilot is flying combat missions, then I'll deal with it," Moretti interrupted. "But I won't compromise the mission to protect myself. Your people on the ground need to know that someone in the air is committed to bringing them home, no matter what. That's what I'm counting on. Admiral?" Moretti turned to face him directly. "If something happens to me tomorrow, if this goes wrong, promise me you won't let them erase the truth. Not about why I was killed on paper, not about the decisions that led to it. The people who made those decisions, they need to be held accountable. You promise, even if it costs you?" "Even then," Reynolds met his gaze steadily. "Some things are more important than rank or career. Protecting people like you, people who did the right thing and got punished for it, that's worth any cost." Moretti extended his hand. "Thank you, sir, for believing in me when I'd almost stopped believing in myself." They shook, the grip firm and sustained, a moment of understanding between 2 men who'd both learned that honor sometimes required defying the very institutions they served. As Reynolds turned to leave, Moretti called out, "Sir, one more thing. That call sign Lone Eagle. You asked me earlier where it came from. I remember. It wasn't my choice. The other pilots hung it on me after that first deployment in Iraq. Said I flew alone into situations no one else would touch, and somehow always brought everyone back." Moretti looked up at his aircraft. "I tried to live up to it. To be the kind of pilot who'd never leave anyone behind, never let regulations or caution override doing what was right. You succeeded. Did I? Or did I just get punished for succeeding in the wrong way?" Reynolds didn't have an answer for that. Sometimes the military rewarded courage. Sometimes it court-martialed it. The difference often came down to politics, timing, and who had the most to lose from the truth. "Get some rest," Reynolds said instead. "Tomorrow you get to be Lone Eagle again. For real this time." "I never stopped being Lone Eagle," Moretti replied quietly. "I just stopped wearing the uniform that went with it." Reynolds left him there in the hangar, alone with his aircraft and his ghosts. As he walked back to quarters, he pulled out his phone and sent a message to Marcus at CIA. "Operation launches at 0400. If this goes wrong, make sure the truth gets out. All of it." The response came within minutes. "Already prepared. But Tom? Make sure it goes right." At 0300 hours, the compound came alive with controlled urgency. Operators moved through final preparations, checking equipment with the ritualized precision of people who understood that small details could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. Harrison and Chen were fitted with civilian clothes and minimal weapons they needed to pass inspection by the compound's security. Concealed communications devices, GPS trackers, and emergency beacons were sewn into clothing seams and hidden in innocuous items. If discovered, They could claim to be black market suppliers, but everyone knew the cover was thin. Reynolds watched the loading process, his stomach tight with tension he'd learned long ago to hide behind professional composure. Remember, you're ghosts until the signal. No heroics, no engagement unless absolutely necessary. Understood, sir, Harrison replied, his voice steady despite the enormous risk he was about to undertake. On the flight line, Rodriguez supervised the arming of the A-10. Precision munitions loaded with care, cannon ammunition belts fed into the GAU-8, fuel tanks topped off. Every system triple-checked, every backup verified. Moretti arrived already suited up in flight gear that Rodriguez had somehow produced gear that fit him perfectly, despite 9 years of supposed death. He didn't ask where she'd gotten it, and she didn't offer explanation. Birds ready, Rodriguez reported. All systems green, weapons hot, fuel for 3 hours on station. Thank you, Chief. Moretti performed his own pre-flight check, movements automatic and thorough. Reynolds joined him at the aircraft. Last chance to change your mind. No, there isn't. Moretti pulled on his helmet. Those people in that compound, they've been written off by everyone else. Just like I was. Somebody needs to care enough to bring them home. You know that once you're in the air, in combat, there's no taking this back. Your identity will be exposed. Good. Maybe it's time people knew that Jack Brennan didn't die 9 years ago. He was killed on paper by cowards, and he's been waiting for the chance to prove he's still worth something. Reynolds helped secure Moretti into the cockpit, checking harness connections and oxygen supply. Fly safe, Major, and bring everyone home. That's always been the plan, Admiral. Moretti's hand moved to the throttle, muscle memory taking over. Lone Eagle, requesting permission to launch. Permission granted. And Major, welcome back. The A-10's engines spooled up, the turbofan whine building to a roar. Reynolds stepped back as the aircraft taxied toward the runway, its distinctive profile silhouetted against the pre-dawn darkness. From the tower, Webb monitored communications while Chen and Harrison loaded into the supply truck that would infiltrate the compound. The operation was in motion now, dozens of moving pieces that had to coordinate perfectly for success. Lone Eagle is airborne, the tower controller reported as the A-10 lifted off, on vector to holding station. Reynolds moved to the operations center, where displays showed real-time positions of all team elements. The supply truck carrying Harrison and Chen approached the target compound. The extraction team positioned in concealed locations around the perimeter. And high above, Lone Eagle circled, waiting for the moment when precision violence would be the only thing standing between captive civilians and death. This is it, Webb said quietly. No turning back now. Reynolds thought about all the decisions that had led to this moment, his choice to believe Moretti, to protect him, to put him back in a combat aircraft despite every regulation and protocol. If this succeeded, he'd be vindicated. If it failed, his career was over. But watching the displays, seeing his people moving into danger, Reynolds knew the choice had never really been his. Sometimes honor demanded action regardless of consequences. And sometimes, the only way to make things right was to let a ghost fly one more time. All units, this is command, Reynolds transmitted. Operation is go. Execute on signal. And remember, everyone comes home. Across the encrypted channels, acknowledgements came back. Professional, controlled, committed. Somewhere above Romania, in an aircraft that officially shouldn't exist, flown by a pilot legally dead for 9 years. Lone Eagle began his approach to the target area. The last mission was beginning.